In the quiet solitude of her studio, nestled where the forest whispered secrets to the town's edge, Elara was a priestess of perfection. Her hands perpetually dusted with the fine, pale powder of clay, moved with a reverence that bordered on worship. She didn't merely shape earth, she sought to command it, to mold it into an unblemished porcelain flawlessness that defied the chaos of the world outside. For Elara, a pot was not just a vessel. It was a testament to control, a monument to an ideal of serene, unbroken beauty. Her life's ambition was poured into a single creation, the Vespera Vase, for months. It had been her shadow, her obsession. It was a tall, elegant form, curved like a whispered secret, so thin in places that it seemed to hold its breath. The glaze was the color of a twilight sky just after the sun has bled from the horizon a deep, impossible indigo. It was to be her masterpiece. It's a piece that would announce her name to the world at the prestigious National Ceramic Exhibition. It was perfect. It had to be. The night before she was to pack it for its journey, a storm rolled in from the mountains, a furious, theatrical beast of wind and lightning. Elara was at home, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. Her mind already at the gallery, envisioning the Vespera Vase under the soft glow of the spotlights. She didn't hear the dry crackle at first, or smell the acrid smoke that began to curl under her door. It was the frantic barking of a neighbor's dog that finally broke her trance. She ran. The studio, her sanctuary, was a roaring pyre against the black, rain-lashed sky. Flames devoured the wooden beams, licked at the shelves laden with years of her labor, and turned her world to ash. Firefighters held her back, their faces grim in the pulsating orange light. All she could do was watch as her temple of perfection was consumed. A hollow, shattering sound echoing in her chest with every collapsing timber. The next morning, under a sky washed clean and indifferent, she walked through the wreckage. Everything was gone. Her wheel was a twisted skeleton of metal. Her glazes were melted into grotesque, glassy puddles. And there, amidst the soot and charred wood, lay the shards of the Vespera Vase, shattered into a dozen pieces. Her perfect creation, the culmination of all her control and precision, was now just a pile of broken promises. That shattering was not confined to the vase. It echoed through Elara. The fire had burned away her identity, leaving behind a brittle, hollow shell. The studio door remained boarded up. The clay under her fingernails was replaced by the phantom grit of ash. She began to wear a mask of weary indifference, a polite, vacant smile that kept the world at bay. Friends who offered condolences were met with a quiet, "I'm fine," a phrase that felt more like a betrayal with every utterance. The societal pressure to be resilient, to bounce back, was a crushing weight. She felt broken and therefore useless. Her life, once a smooth, spinning vessel on the wheel, had been thrown off center and collapsed into ruin. Weeks bled into a gray, listless month. One afternoon, seeking nothing but escape, she drove aimlessly, ending up in a neighboring town, a place of quaint antique shops and quiet streets. Drawn by a sense of stillness, she stepped into a small, dusty store filled with scrolls, lacquered boxes, and the faint scent of sandalwood. An elderly Japanese man with eyes that held the calm depth of a forest pool looked up from a delicate tea bowl he was wiping and gave a slight, knowing bow. He introduced himself as Kenji. Elara drifted through the shop, her fingers ghosting over objects that had lived 100 lives. In a glass case bathed in a single beam of sunlight sat a ceramic bowl unlike any she had ever seen. It was a simple, rustic piece, but it was crisscrossed with a network of fine, golden lines. They were not painted on. They were seams tracing the paths of old fractures. The cracks weren't hidden. They were illuminated, celebrated, turned into the very heart of the bowl's beauty. "Kintsugi," Kenji said softly, appearing at her side. "Golden joinery." He explained the ancient art. When a cherished piece of pottery breaks, the artisan does not see it as the end. They see it as a new beginning. The shards are painstakingly pieced back together with a special lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The bowl does not pretend it was never broken. he said, his voice a gentle melody. "It wears its history as part of its beauty. The breaks are a map of its journey. Many believe it is stronger and more beautiful for having been broken." His words struck a chord deep within Elara, a pure, resonant note in the silence of her despair. She thought of the shards of the Vespera Vase, lying in a box under her bed like skeletal remains. She thought of her own shattered spirit, the cracks she was so desperately trying to hide from the world. That evening, a sliver of light pierced through the heavy curtains of her grief. She drove back to her ruined studio, pried open the boarded door, and retrieved the box of shards. Back home, she laid them out on her kitchen table. They were a puzzle of her own failure. But now, she saw something else. She saw a story. Healing, she realized, was not a passive waiting game. It was an active, deliberate art. Her gold would be her resilience. The wisdom born from her loss, the grit she would need to face the wreckage of her life. She began her work. It was a slow, meditative process. She researched the ancient techniques, sourced the Urashi lacquer, the fine gold powder. Each piece of the Vespera vase had to be cleaned, its sharp edges softened just enough to accept the mend. As she worked, her tears sometimes mixed with the lacquer. Each time she joined two pieces, she was not just mending a vase. She was mending herself. She was accepting the fire. She was forgiving herself for a disaster that was never her fault. She was learning that control was an illusion, and that true strength lay not in avoiding the breaks, but in how you repaired them. One afternoon, as a sunbeam streamed through the window and caught the fine line of gold she was painting, she remembered a line from a song she'd once loved. A line from the poet Leonard Cohen that had never truly made sense until this very moment. "There is a crack in everything," she whispered to the broken piece in her hand. "That's how the light gets in." The light was finally getting in. The new vase was finished weeks later. It was no longer the Vespera vase, a symbol of flawless, cold perfection. This was something new, something more. The deep indigo was now a landscape. A night sky streaked with golden constellations that told the story of its own violent creation. The lines of gold were not scars of damage, but veins of light, proof of its survival. She named it Hikari. No, Ato, traces of light. The deadline for the exhibition was looming. Her original entry was destroyed, but the gallery had extended her an invitation to submit a replacement. For days, she hesitated. To display this piece felt like baring her soul, showing the world her deepest wounds. But then she looked at the vase, glowing on her mantelpiece. Hiding it would be the real failure. Its cracks were not a sign of weakness. They were proof of its history, its resilience. They were her history. She walked into the pristine, white-walled gallery, carrying Hikari no Itoa. The curator looked at the piece, his expression unreadable. He simply nodded and placed it on a pedestal in the center of the room. On opening night, the gallery buzzed with quiet conversation and the clinking of glasses. Elara stood in a corner, her heart a fluttering bird in her chest. People gravitated toward her vase. They didn't just look, they stared. They leaned in, tracing the golden lines with their eyes. They didn't see a broken thing that had been clumsily repaired. They saw a story of fire and survival. They saw beauty not in spite of its history, but because of it. A formidable art critic, known for his scathing reviews, stood before the vase for a long time. Elara held her breath. He turned, his gaze finding hers across the room, and he gave a slow, respectful nod. Later, she overheard him telling a colleague, "Most of the pieces here are perfect, and therefore forgettable. That one has a soul." Elara finally understood. Her scars, the memory of the fire, the months of despair, the painful rebuilding, were her gold. They were what made her unique. They were the brilliant veins that gave her life a depth and beauty that her quest for perfection never could. She was no longer a priestess of flawlessness. She was an artist of resilience, beautifully broken and perfectly mended. In the wreckage of her old life, she had not just recovered. She had been reborn, stronger at the broken places, finally and truly a masterpiece.